Council Tech Forum, which is part of the Autumn Conference, which is taking place in Dubai. We're doing this virtually, and we have a really interesting group of panelists from around the region and from me in Britain. I'd first like to welcome Alexandre Hugo Lore from the World Bank Group, who will be talking about the digitization of Iraq and his report that he put out back in April. Alexandre is a senior private sector specialist at the World Bank Group. On my right is Laura Kudari, who is the director at the Iraq Tech Ventures, involved in investment in Iraqi startups, and other things. I'd like to also introduce Jawad Abbasi, who's director of the Middle East region for the GSMA, which is the big global telecom association. And with me also, welcome Zane Al-Tamimi, who's the chief executive of Zane Cash. So we have a terrific panel. I'm afraid we were going to have MasterCard, Elias, but he's unfortunately had to fly somewhere to a client. So he's not able to join us. But that said, we have a terrific lineup. In the first part of this session, we're going to be talking about the digitization of Iraq and how that can happen. And as I mentioned, 6 months ago, Alexandre Lore wrote a report, a monitor for the World Bank Group that made a number of recommendations about what Iraq could do to digitize and modernize its economy. And we're going to be discussing that in the first instance. Alexandre is going to give us a presentation to get a sense of what he proposed and how far we've got. And then the other panelists will also be presenting their views on this, some of whom are very much practitioners in this area, and actually at the sharp end of seeing what's happening, and also to recommend what might happen next and what still needs to be done. So if I may pass over to Alexandre in the first instance, looking forward to what you've got to say, Alexandre. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Good morning to all the audience and also the panelists. I'm going to be displaying my screen. I don't know if you're seeing it properly. Let me know when it's all good.
Yeah, it's all good.
Thank you. So as Ashley mentioned, the World Bank Group started the 2020 year on a digital flavor. And so in April of this year, we released an economic monitor, which was titled Navigating the Perfect Storm, and included a special focus on laying the foundation for a new economy in Iraq, looking at what will it take for Iraq to realize digital transformation. This report was against the background of fulfilling two important World Bank Group goals, which are eradicating poverty, but also reducing inequality among the population. It is front and center in our strategic vision in the Middle East and North Africa region, and it complements several other initiatives which focus on human capital and maximizing finance for development. What we wanted to highlight in the report is that the universal adoption and effective application of digital technology are expected to characterize the economy of the future, and therefore Iraq should be part of this journey rather than being a witness of this digital transformation. Digital transformation for Iraq needs to happen now, and the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic made that urgency even more important. And the report looked at 5 elements of the digital economy, because as you know, digital transformation cannot happen in a vacuum, and therefore there are 5 foundational elements to it. The first one is on digital infrastructure, which is the wide availability of quality internet. I won't talk too much about that because I believe that Jawad will be probably best placed to provide some insight. The second pillar is on digital financial services, which is to promote a cashless economy. The third pillar is on digital platform, which are essentially services provided by the government online, the national identification, and also digital exchange, which are public or private platform. The fourth pillar is on digital skills, to be really equipping Iraqi youth with the necessary skill to be employable and be ready for the new economy in Iraq. And finally, the fifth and last pillar, which is dear to my heart, is on digital entrepreneurship, which essentially look at supporting the innovation ecosystem to generate new products and services for the very large consumer market that we see in Iraq. So 2020 started on a digital note, and we made an update to the report with a full version of the Iraq Economic Monitor. I encourage you to be looking at those reports. They are publicly accessible. The second edition of this year Economic Monitor was titled "Protecting Vulnerable Iraqis in a Time of a Pandemic." Obviously, as you know, this is the elephant in the room, and Iraq has been hardly hit by the COVID-19. And so in that follow-up report, we try to look more closely at who are the vulnerable people and businesses which are being affected in Iraq, and how to address the pain that have come with the COVID-19, which we summarize in three main problems. First of all, it is the mobility restriction. Second, it is the lack of liquidity, and third, it is the uncertainty which prevent investors for putting money in the country. Both these reports have escalated or have been feeding into what we call at the World Bank a flagship product, meaning that it's an important piece of analytical work that we usually do only every 5 years, and it is called Country Economic Memorandum. That's also an interesting report to be consulting online. It's a public document. The title is "To Break Out of Fragility," and it focuses on the drivers of diversification and growth for the country moving forward. This report was actually launched a couple of months back. Actually, we're on November, so it was launched end of September, early October, by the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Iraq and the World Bank Country Director. And it looks at those critical times where Iraq finds itself at the crossroad of nearly 2 decades of fragility since the 2003 war. And it looks at what needs to be done by the public and the private sector to get out of this fragility trap. So this year, 2020, was focusing on the digital economy and on addressing the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic on the private sector, and it reinforced our assumption and our recommendation back in spring that digital technology and the digital economy will contribute in building back better Iraq and supporting the economic resilience of the private sector in country. Are you seeing the second slide?
Yeah.
Thank you. So once we have laid the sort of the ground for what needs to be done, and I think that there will be no surprises for any of the panelists and the audience, it's how can we pave the way for this private sector recovery? And I have to stress that the government of Iraq has been quite responsive to this constructive relationship that has been established with the World Bank since the beginning of the calendar year. And as a matter of fact, through a cabinet resolution in May 12, 2020, the government of Iraq decided to work on a multi-sectoral white paper, and that paper was released last month. I think it's also a public document, and I really also encourage you to look at it, because it is the first time for many years that the government put together a task force to lay out what are the critical reforms to support the country overall and the private sector in particular. The ambition of that white paper was to redefine the role of the state, and you know that this is a big issue in Iraq due to the legacy of the role of the government in private sector affairs. The second thing was to select radical improvements that could be led by the government to catalyze private sector growth. The third ambition of that paper is to create that enabling environment and level playing field for all businesses, regardless of their size or their age, to be able to thrive in Iraq. Finally, it looks at addressing the critical impediment for the core financial sector, whether it is the banking system or the labor productivity. Because in the absence of those core reform, everything that we are trying to do on the digital front would only have a marginal effect. From the World Bank side, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice, which is the department at the World Bank that looks at private and financial sector development. There is at least three things which we believe will be important contributor to the white paper. First of all, the government is suggesting the establishment of a fund of funds which will use public sector funding to de-risk investment coming from local, regional, and international investors. And it can be done through many different ways, but I can come back to that in case there is some specific question about this fund of fund. It also look at many reforms which are needed for micro, small, and medium enterprises, and this could be bundled as a sort of a small business act to have a reference point in the legislation, in the regulation, and then its translation in practice for businesses. And the third thing is really to really upgrade the ambition of Iraq when it comes to private sector skills agenda, so that the mismatch that we are seeing today reduces over time. We have to admit that overall there has been very little progress on the legal and regulatory front, because there is still for the last 18 months. But I can say that there has been 2 licensed mobile wallet providers that are expanding their operation, with a third one to follow in the Kurdistan region. The Central Bank of Iraq and the government of Iraq have been running campaign to promote the use of e-payments during this time of pandemic. We usually with sunset clause, but we are hoping that some of those good intervention could be sustained over time. And there are multiple projects in the making to be able to digitize cash transfer, to move from physical cash to cashless transfer to us, but also to the business activity, so business to business transaction by using digital financial services. And the World Bank and the government have been engaged quite extensively in the past 6 months or so with industry player to also be addressing this public-private and private-private coordination failure, most notably on standards when it comes to QR code, but also with maybe the establishment of a payment industry association, which would make sense in the overall context of these digital priorities. The second pillar where government and the World Bank have made some good progress is on digital entrepreneurship. And by that, I mean MSME financing, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And as a matter of fact, as a follow-up of the spring report, the government of Iraq requested support from the World Bank to provide financing to underserved segment of the private sector, which mainly mean the microfinance segment, but also the early stage access to finance segment. And to that effect, we are currently finalizing the preparation of a new operation, which will, in terms of objective, will test the effectiveness of selected financial and firm level intervention in providing three things: liquidity, in supporting adjustment for targeted viable and growth-oriented firm, and in mobilizing private investment. The project is probably not as big, financially speaking, or in terms of ambition that people would have want to see in Iraq, but we have to be mindful about the fragility context in Iraq, and also the fact that we need to go step by step so that we can demonstrate to the market some result, rather than having too much of an ambition and then being sort of stuck into a paralysis and not being able to show to the market that the government is going to be working hand in hand with the private sector to improve the environment for businesses. This project is looking at financial inclusion and also SME support measure. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in a nutshell, I would say that 2020 has been a very productive year, and I'm saying that as a newcomer to Iraq. I just started to work in the country about 2 years and 3 months ago, and I have seen more happening in the last 6 months than that has happened the 18 months before that. And what I'm really would like to convey to the audience, whether you are from the public or the private sector, let's come together with a constructive public-private dialogue and be selective as to what needs to take place by the end of this year and in 2021, so that we can build on results, so that we can sort of come back on earth, not have unachievable goals or targets, but go step by step and make sure that we don't reverse some of the positive development that have taken place in the last 6 months or so. Ashley, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I could go on and on, as you know, but maybe it's good to hear a different perspective from the private sector and from the infrastructure side. And I'm happy to clarify any point, or maybe to emphasize some of this more specific intervention that we are looking for by the end of the year and next calendar year. Over.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandre. That's really quite interesting. I think we'll probably later discuss how far they've got with your proposals, what the impediments might be, and what's actually working. If I could probably go down next to Jawad next, because he's going to be looking at the infrastructure side of things. And then if I could then go to Yazen, who's going to be talking about financial payments, digital inclusion, and online transactions. Then finally to Laura, who will talk about it from a perspective of an investor and an early stage startup. So over to you, Jawad, if we'd like to hear your feedback on your views, and also critique a sense of, from your perspective, what's working, what's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this. Happy to be here. I am Jawad Abbasi. I head the MENA region at the GSMA. The GSMA is a trade association that represents the interests of mobile operators globally. The Iraqi telecom market, and the mobile sector specifically, has undergone quite an interesting history, if you will. For example, during the ISIS insurgency, a third of the country was outside the central government's control, and that affected massive damage on the mobile network infrastructure. Also, there are some characteristics of the mobile sector in Iraq, in that while we're gonna see hopefully 4G deployment in the country in 21 and beyond, the country is still a 3G country. There hasn't been a 4G country. We've seen recently a good development of the government allowing technology neutrality in the spectrum that the operators have, which will allow them to deploy 4G. And this brings me to one interesting point, one important point, interesting and very important. For any mobile sector to develop to its full potential, there are prerequisites. One of the most important aspects of it is technology neutrality, the ability of operators to use the spectrum they have for any technology they see fit to cater to the market demand. So if you have a situation where the spectrum is said you can only use it for 2G or 3G or 4G, by definition, you are making a suboptimal scenario for your telecommunications sector. So technology neutrality is vital for the Iraqi mobile sector, because then it would allow operators to refarm the spectrum and deploy 4G where it's needed, and eventually in the coming few years, hopefully also deploy 5G. So that's one characteristic of the Iraqi market that we are seeing a positive impact, a positive development on. Similarly, to have ideal 4G deployment and to think in the future of another 5G deployment that's also in an ideal setup, operators have to have control on their backhaul. So in the second generation 2G and 3G, backhaul was fine. You could use microwave in most of your network and still deliver a relatively good service. For 4G, you definitely need fiber optic backhaul, and fiber optic backhaul to make it an optimal situation in your 4G deployment, that you will need to have control over backhaul, over fiber optic backhaul. So operators need to be able to invest in their backhaul and their fiber optic infrastructure whenever they need to, and to have the option of either buying, renting, or building their backhaul infrastructure, their fiber optics-based backhaul infrastructure. The current situation in Iraq is that no, it's actually operators need to buy it from other operators, and they don't have the ability to invest in fiber optic infrastructure as whenever they need to, or pair their demands of their network deployment. And it's actually quite expensive to lease and rent that fiber optics infrastructure. So it's much more expensive, which translates into higher costs for the consumers and pressures the financial model of the operators. And they don't have service level agreements. So if the service is not optimal, they cannot they don't have recourse to the operator from which they're renting the fiber optics to say, I need a better service. So it's more expensive and lower quality. The solution is very easy. The solution is liberalize the market, allow full competition, allow the operators to invest in fiber optics. That creates infrastructure redundancy for the country. So it's very good news for the country. And it of course, it lowers prices, and when it lowers the cost, that means the better ability for the operators to invest in expanding their networks, and also lower cost on the end users, and of course technology neutrality. So, and finally, of course, on spectrum, you always need to have a clear roadmap of spectrum. So operators need to know that, okay, this is the spectrum available in the country. This is the future spectrum allocation in the country, so that they buy it when they need it, and not have it artificially increased on cost, not have its cost artificially increased by artificial scarcity of spectrum. So it has been a complicated situation in Iraq, but of course the operators are there for the long term. They have been in the country for over 15 years now, and they're eager to stay in the country and invest more in the country. So what we need is liberalization, more competition, and fiber optics and so on, and also adopting best practices in the spectrum. All of this will give Iraq the mobile broadband infrastructure that it deserves, because frankly, as it stands now, the mobile broadband infrastructure in Iraq has been a laggard regionally. They still don't have 4G. the effect of the fiber optics constraints and the effect of the recent war has not been ideal, let's say, to the setup in Iraq. So, but of course, adopting best practices will help Iraq to leapfrog and join the ranks of the rest of the regions, hopefully with a very robust and reliable 4G network, and eventually in the coming few years, a 5G network as well.
Thank you very much, Jawad. Just very quickly, is there any reference to this in the white paper, Alexandra, to liberalization of and towards 5G? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. There is an entire chapter on digital infrastructure. I think, as like Jawad has mentioned, most of players, both public and private, are cognizant of this issue. So there are at least a half dozen important digital infrastructure reform which are spelled out in the white paper. Now, really, the question is how to prioritize and face those reform, and how the executive can get the buy-in of the legislative to make sure that it is not just coming from one side of government, but that there is also the representation of the people of Iraq that would also buy into those reform. Because we have seen very often, like for the national payment system law, it has been submitted to Parliament for a year and a half, and then it got stuck there. So I think that relationship between the executive and legislative branches is also something that I am sure MSMA and the bank will want to be working on, so that this good intention actually translates into legal and regulatory improvement.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jawad. If I could come to Yazen now, who's Chief Executive of Zane Cash and one of the recipients of the broadband system, and also one of the key practitioners on online payments. Yazen, look forward to hearing from you.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Ashley. Can you guys hear me well, first off? Okay,
you're
perfect.
actually in the conference, is that right? Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Now to Jawad's point about 4G, unfortunately we had a blow for the 4G, so now it has been put on hold by the state last week. So we're supposed to see 4G coming in January 1st or early 2021, but now it has been on hold by the state. So that's a big blow for the whole digitization of Iraq. The biggest challenge that we have today, as let's say coming from a mobile wallet say operation, is the internet. We try to push as many services out there, but then if we don't have the right internet out there, then there will always be not an optimal customer experience. And that's what we're struggling with today. So I'm hoping that the government would look at a more long-term benefit for the economy there, see the challenge that we're facing, and then maybe get that, speed it up, because as Iraq, we're way behind. If you tell anyone we're still on 3G, they'll be surprised. How are we still surviving? We're not a very Africa model where it's all USSD and 2G. Most Iraqis youth are smartphone users. They're very used to using apps. These apps need internet. Taking seconds to do a transaction, and then getting, for example, an error due to a bad internet, that's bad customer experience, and then they will stop using it. We are surviving so far, but if it does push to a 4G, we will see more individuals coming in to use digital products. Now, if you look at Iraq, it's mainly youth. They're all using smartphones. Everybody has apps. We have above 20 million people using social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, and so forth. So they're there waiting for more products to be used. Now, on top, you have the corona, what happened. So more people who were reluctant to use digital products were pushed to use digital products. So what I'm seeing in this year, because of corona, because of the bad, if you've been to Baghdad or Iraq, you'll see how people suffer from traffic. It takes me sometimes, I mean, just 2 days ago, it took me an hour and a half to get to the central bank and an hour and a half to get back. So that's 3 hours of my day. No one wants to do that to, for example, order something or go to the bank. So, and then, you know, the culture of Iraq, there's still a risk, there's still a conservative culture and sort of safety risks and so forth. So people prefer a digital product, and that's why we're trying to provide that to everyone. This year, we've seen a lot of e-commerce companies come on board. There's many other companies, a lot of last mile delivery on board. We're seeing more fintech companies like ours come on board. So we're seeing that trend. But then if there's not a proper bridge between us as the providers and then the customers on the other side through proper regulations and proper internet, then that won't be as a smooth sailing for us. Now as Zane Cash, we've grown tremendously in the past 5 years. We're still trying to push as much, but then it's still the setup. It's not ideal to come close to regional success and global success that have happened so far. So that's from Zane Cash. In a nutshell, we're seeing a big trend in digitization. It's not up to the expectations, but we're seeing a good direction. There are obviously challenges. Mainly is the safety of the country. The country is still not as safe. That let's say topics like cash management and cash transportation is still difficult. Internet, but so government are still not onboarding to online, so still bill payment is not out there, and still Iraq needs a lot of work on the government side in order for us to work in a better way.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask why the government put a hold on 4G?
So I mean, it's in the news now. There's conflicting information. I don't have, since this is not my field, I don't have much information about it. But all we know, there's a bit of a conflict between the state and the mobile operators, and it's always that the blame is on the mobile operators for some reason. I feel it's the only country that you find there's always let's say a fight against the mobile operators. We don't know why, despite that we know that internet and telecommunication is the enablers of all our businesses. And even if there's a conflict, I mean, it does not mean that we have to push the 4G launch months. Then you can actually launch and then continue to work with the mobile operators. Why hold that up? That means there's a lot that being affected, especially today. The economy of Iraq is not doing well with the oil prices within the corona. You hear news that it's been 2 or 3 months that government employees haven't got their salaries. Okay, well, all that, should we not look at how can we create new businesses? Well, new commerce. These unemployed individuals are probably looking for other means to start to get an income. What is the first thing that, let's say, a young or a youth would do? Is like, let me sell things online. That's the first thing I did when I was a kid. So if he wants to sell online, then meant, okay, so he needs a proper cheap internet. He needs a payment channel. He needs product. Okay, then that is happening today, but they're still struggling. Internet is expensive. Internet's slow. And then what they do is they look at the mobile operators. Well, it's Zane's fault. It's the other operators' fault, but it's not. And it's a fault of the government that's not helping mobile operators to launch the services that they need to.
Is there anything that can be done? What would you think should be done? How can lobbying make a difference? How can the World Bank make a difference? How can everybody make a difference here to change their minds?
Yeah, no, it's obviously difficult in Iraq. I mean, sometimes some people lobby for the more personal reasons and interests. So it's not in our hands. It's more of it's out of our hand. It's bigger than I feel us. It has the government needs to sit down together, look on more a long-term strategy, not think about, well, the mobile operators has to pay X amount for us to give them the 4G. Well, if you're looking, well, I need, for example, get maybe a return out of the mobile operators, but then you're disregarding how the full economy is being impacted. Us as the other mobile as the other mobile wallets, as the banking system, we still have issues in our services due to internet. We still get, let's say, for example, incomplete transactions. We still get a bad customer experience. We still lose money because people are not onboarding, because they don't have the right internet. Even when they get onboarded and they use us, they still sometimes get incomplete transactions due to internet. Or they find that, well, you know what, to use the service, I need internet. It's expensive. It's not working, and it's just becoming very complicated for all of us. Yeah.
Just if I may just ask one other question before we move on to Laura, but it feels from what you're saying that there's a big appetite out there from consumers, from the people that are using phones. They want to get apps, they want to do things, they want to trade, and yet they're being held back by the infrastructure. Is that possibly a reasonable reading of it?
Yeah, 100%. You're right on, Ashley. The people are ready to use digital products. They have all sorts of apps. Some are becoming very successful, and we're looking at the likes of Kareem, the food delivery companies. Us as mobile wallets are also becoming successful, but it's not at the levels that we needed it to be. There's much more that's happening out there that the country needs. And it's not happening. A lot of bigger companies, let's say, for example, Amazon or the likes of it, they're still looking at Iraq from far, and they're not stepping in Iraq because they're worried about many things. One thing is the state: is it safe? The internet is difficult. The regulations are difficult. But then the end users are questioning how come, and then what's happening is there's a big cloud above them, and that's the state that's not helping the country or its people.
This is a very interesting dialectic, because we've got, on the one hand, Alexandra putting proposals together saying, let's do things step by step, let's prioritize exactly probably the practical way of doing it. On the other hand, we have the opportunity of a big bang opportunity here. A liberalization happened in the UK in '87 when everything was deregulated and suddenly the economy exploded. And this is the opportunity possibly for Iraq through the digital economy. But obviously on the practical side, Alexandra would say, let's do it one bit by bit, let's step by step. There's a slight tension here between the opportunity and the reality. Alexandra?
Thank you, Ashley. I think that it's not contradictory. Usually, what we need to be sort of mindful of is that you will not force anyone against its will. So that's work for people, that works for countries, and countries are sovereign, and they need to be convinced. The role of the World Bank, it's a cooperative of 189 countries, and so we are using our member country and the success in other members country to show to our client country, in that case Iraq, that technically speaking it has happened, it is possible, and then each country has its set of political economic constraints, its set of fragility, economic constraints. And we have not seen any reforms that have worked against the will of a government or its representation through parliament. And very often, people will refer at the World Bank and the IMF as like sort of imposing reforms or anything on the government. So it's absolutely not true, for the first and simple reason that usually we try to fit into a government flagship document, and we have it. We didn't have it for so many years, at least now we have it. And then we try to see with government what it is that should be prioritized. So in paper or in theory, now you have a reference document which has the level of ambition that most of private sector and development partner were looking for. And so we need to move to that implementation stage. And when I say we should be going, step by step, We can start with a very ambitious first step, but the point is that it should be focused, a bit like a delivery unit. You cannot deliver if you have too many conquering or multi-task to be handling. It better work if you are convinced, and it better work if it is focused and well prioritized. Over.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Laura Kudari here from Iraq Tech Ventures, who is operating at the startup and investment area. So anything the government does really has quite a big impact on enabling and facilitating what's happening in that area. Laura, can I hear from you, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. So Ashley, I'll just briefly introduce myself and then share my screen with some of the slides to talk about the Iraqi tech ecosystem. Hello to everyone. My name is Laura, and I co-founded Iraq Tech Ventures with my husband, Mohammed Kaderi. Iraq Tech Ventures was founded with the mission to find promising Iraqi startups to invest in and also connect with international investors. Thus far, we've invested in 3 technology-based SMEs, soon to be a 4th one, and we're preparing to coordinate 2 more fundraising rounds with 2 of the startups that we've invested in 2021. So very exciting developments. But not without their challenges that my panelists have spoken about. And so I'll just share my screen briefly to talk about Iraq tech ecosystem. Can you see it okay?
Yep, very good, thank you.
Awesome. And so this is a useful diagram that that we've used in the past to talk about successful technology ecosystems. And I think it'll be useful for today's discussion when looking at Iraq and which components Iraq has and which ones it needs improvement on. Today, I've replaced universities with educational programs. I think I'd like to include all educational programs, since not all of them come from universities. There's just, there's excellent work being done by nonprofits and other organizations that target entrepreneurs and SMEs with their educational programs. And this space is actually quite active. So, in addition to some of these, the university-led efforts, I think there's Al Mansour University's incubator on here. There's also a lot of nonprofits that have educational programs. The Station, 51 Labs have been very active the past few years. Rawad Al Iraq has their very well-known Iraqpreneurs initiatives that take place all over the country. The University of Suleimania has launched Takween Accelerator, which is the first accelerator in the country. And Tech Hub, which works with M-Select, is a co-working space. And so you'll see a lot of these are, there's organizations active in both Kurdistan and federal Iraq. And all of these have programs targeted at improving the business acumen and technological skills of entrepreneurs and small businesses. In the entrepreneurial space, it's also very active and very exciting. It's not as active as it should be due to some of the challenges that Yazan was just mentioning and Jawad were mentioning. Although many of these startups have seen a lot of success, as Yazan was mentioning, since COVID, some of the startups that we've invested in have grown month over month in double-digit growth, triple-digit growth in some of these months, because people have been forced to use technology and technological services during the lockdown. So that's been very, very exciting. But that being said, the infrastructure makes it very difficult and frustrating for entrepreneurs. Like Yazan mentioned, there's a lot of consumer quality issues that happen when you're trying to deliver a service and your app doesn't, fails you and your technology fails you. So those are some of the reasons why I think we aren't seeing as many startups in Iraq as you have in some other countries in the region. But it is active nonetheless. And I think another interesting bubble in this cluster of innovation is the bubble that has major corporations, strategic investors, R&D centers, and potential acquirers. And so the major corporations that we've seen really play an active role in the tech ecosystem include Zane. Yazan just spoke about Zane Cash, which has been a really important development. Zane also has innovation centers set up throughout the country, which is extremely exciting to see. Asia Cell as well has taken an active role in the startup scene, partnering with institutions to give grants, to sponsor boot camps and things like that. And then a really amazing success, regional success story, Kareem, recently entered Iraq in 2018 and has expanded in the country in 2019 and 2020. And I think that has been a really exciting cultural shift that you've seen in the way that people talk about startups. Kareem has set an example of what an on-demand service is. So it's changed the way Iraqis think about and talk about tech-based businesses and on-demand services. And so along in this bubble, along with some of the items in this bubble, include potential acquirers, which I believe Yazan mentioned as well. These are purely just potential acquirers. I don't believe they have any plans on acquiring any businesses in Iraq yet, but we hope one day regional players like these companies that have a regional presence that have not entered Iraq will consider acquiring Iraqi startups as a mode of entry into the country. And it's just, an example of the types of organizations that could potentially enter Iraq through acquisition. An area that some of the panelists have mentioned that could be improved is government's involvement in the tech ecosystem. What we've seen is a lot of involvement from foreign governments in the tech ecosystem. So Orange Corners is a beautiful initiative by the Dutch government. GIZ is from the German government. These have an incredible impact on the startup community, but in the form of grants. They partnered with local organizations to do educational programs. And then also USAID has a tremendous mandate to work with organizations like Cross Boundary and other nonprofits that are focused on mobilizing private pools of capital and also strengthening the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's opportunity for the government of Iraq, though, in the ways that my panelists have described in terms of infrastructure, in terms of easing regulation, making it easier for startups to register their business, making it easier for shareholders to become investors in businesses. And we can talk more about areas of improvement for government, but I think that it's been exciting to hear, as Alexandra mentioned, the receptiveness of the Iraqi government lately, in the past few months, because of their recognition of the need to diversify Iraq's economy. So that is exciting. Another area of the tech ecosystem that really needs improvement is investment and access to financing. It's very difficult for entrepreneurs to get bank loans. It's very difficult for entrepreneurs to actually receive investment sometimes because of the extra due diligence that's put on bank transfers. So there's more that could be done in the financial world in Iraq that could help entrepreneurs receive investment easier. And so really there's only been 4 publicized investment deals that resemble startup deals, investment deals that you've seen in more mature tech ecosystems. And Iraq Tech Ventures has been part of 3 of 4 of those deals. And Euphrates Advisors is an example of an investment firm that's invested with us in Miswag, for example. And then Northern Gulf Partners is an example of another investment firm that invested in Lezu Eats, which was a very exciting round as well. That was the 4th investment that we didn't participate in, but was very exciting to see. And then Capita is an example of an organization that is active on the educational front. They're partnered with Orange Corners, but they have also made waves in increasing investment opportunities for angels and institutions. I believe that they're closing their first few rounds in Iraqi startups and tech businesses later this year or early next year. Hopefully we're going to be part of one of those deals. So we're very excited about that. And so in sum, these are certainly not all of the players that are involved in Iraq's tech ecosystem, but they're some of them. And there's been, within the past few years, we've really noticed a lot of activity in the educational and entrepreneurial spaces, but there's still a lot of opportunities for major corporations, investors, and government to get more involved. So that kind of, I hope that is a good start to lay the foundations of a conversation about the tech ecosystem. And I know that I went through some of those players quite quickly. So feel free to leave any questions in the chat if you have it.
Thank you very much indeed, Laura. That's really interesting and a good exposition so we can all see what exactly is going down. Obviously, we need to make it enormous. Someone earlier mentioned during our conversations that it's quite hard for entrepreneurs to actually start up businesses because there's quite a high amount of money they have to raise in order to set a business up. Is that true?
It absolutely is. It could be very cost prohibitive for a lot of entrepreneurs, and is, I would say, probably one of the main reasons why people decide not to start businesses or not to register their businesses. So there's a lot of startups that you speak to that are collecting revenue, that are operating, that you want to invest in, but they haven't actually registered. And so for an investor, obviously that's a huge red flag. And you can't have investment in companies that are not registered. But it's there. I understand from the entrepreneur's perspective how difficult it is for them to get registered, as for some people. So really, entrepreneurs are left with friends and family, or savings, because of their lack of access to finance.
That's fairly extraordinary, given you want to have a big startup boom for young people to get involved with. Why make it hard? I'm not sure why the government would. I think it's $40,000 you had to pay to register. Alexander, do you have any thoughts on this, and why would this impediment be there?
Thank you, Ashley. I think Laura was spot on. So there is two ways at looking at those regulation. In theory, it takes indeed a lot of times, but in sort of the nuance of diversity of regulation in Iraq, it may be faster in some places, and it may be a very lengthy process in other. I think that we are basically being affected by a legacy legislation, because many of those company acts, insurance acts, etc., they date back from a time where private initiative was a crime. So that's where Iraq is coming from. Being an entrepreneur, starting a business outside of the public sphere used to be a crime. And so obviously it's not spelled out like that in the legislation, but everything that was preventing or making it difficult for people to start a business or being entrepreneurial is still, unfortunately, very well embedded in most of the law and regulation that we have in the country. And very often, even if the law is being sort of improved, and even if there is public policy or statement which are quite positive, The reality is that at the regulation, licensing, and sort of supervisory level, usually embedded in line ministry, each ministry will create its kingdom of rules, which basically contradict sometimes the overall effort of the government. And I think what you mentioned, the $40,000, is not the startup cost. It's a recent decision that was taken by the Ministry of Communication to have an annual license fee of I think $37.5 thousand dollars per year, which maybe does not look that expensive, you know, when you look at the size of the economy. But if you look from the perspective of an entrepreneur, a startup company, or even a SME, this is a very high cost and entry to barrier. And so the intention from the Ministry of Communication was positive. It was to say, we have no rules that codify the way you know, mail packages and products are being delivered door to door. So yes, there is a gap, and the intention was good, and then the outcome of that intention is actually probably the opposite of what we would have wanted to see for the private sector. And I think that there is a lot of sort of disconnect sometimes between that ambition, the public policy or public statement, and then how it is translated at the level of the ministry. Because many of these codified rules are basically, and in Africa we like to say that it's the power of the pen. You know, it's just one person that can basically create those rules without having to refer back at prime minister level or at the parliament. And so this sort of side regulation or licensing is also something that would like to see a bit more coherent and maybe even clean up. And I mentioned the Small Business Act. And so you could have one point of reference to make sure that everything that is being created does not affect negatively those that need the most help, you know, to start with, those that are just starting, the young people, those that are the hardest to reach in terms of access to finance. Over.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to wind up this session because we run over a bit because it's so interesting. And I don't think we've really explored all the points we wanted to discuss, but I think it's raised some fantastic points. What I'd like is for you to maybe just have a quick comment, each of you at the end. Alexandra, thank you so much for your deep involvement in helping move things on. I'm taking the view from you that, you know, there's from big practical issues here that you have to take people with you. You have to get the government and the legislature to deliver these things, and that's not easy. You've got big inertia from the past. You can't do it overnight. I'm getting from the entrepreneurs that actually there's a huge opportunity if we get this right. We can all work together. Everyone can bring investment in, de-risk everything, and actually there's a huge goal and a prize on the tech side if we get it right. So somewhere in between, we have to make sure that the legislature feels less risk averse and less inert, and on the other hand, embrace this new technology, which may be scary for some people, but will give great opportunity to Iraq. I've had enough to speak, but Yazin, would you like to say something finally? And Jawad, Yazin first, maybe Jawad, Laura perhaps, and then Alexandra finish. Yazin, any comments? Unmute.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. So I wanna focus more as a last message from my end to Laura's point about startups. So startups is in any economy, they are the drivers of the digital economy. And then if we don't encourage them or don't enable them, then Iraq will stay as is, dependent on a few sectors, which are basically oil and gas and then telecom, and then you won't have any companies that will thrive and grow. And as someone who's been operating a mobile wallet, so I have seen startups, they come to us for payment channels, and as someone who tried to run and currently running a small business in Iraq. As an investor, we look at risk to return, and what I've seen in Iraq, it's the worst ratio. So risk is high and return is super low. And return is low not because there is no demand or there is revenue. Cost and effort is super high in Iraq. So starting from registering a company, the effort it takes, the money it takes, and then the government would come back to you and they would look at, they would charge you taxes not based on your net income. They charge you taxes based on your top line or your revenues, because they don't trust reporting. As opposed, if you look at the US, there's if you get negative income, you can actually roll that tax to, or that benefits for the years after. So, and then on top, you have to hire a lawyer every year. And then 4, you have to put your employees on Social Security. So they make things much more complicated. Might as well just say, look, just don't open a business with us. I mean, this more or less, this is the indirect message that the state is giving. Hey guys, don't register with us. So everybody's going into the irregular way, or the gray way, is that we will collect cash. We don't want to register with the government. We'll keep it all informal the way as is now. But then as a payment channel, I can provide them service because they're not registered. Compliance won't let me give them a service. Investors like Laura won't invest with them. And then it becomes a very limited business, and then the country will struggle. Now, if you say, well, what's the solution? The solution is to change the whole government. I mean, the government needs to be run by more innovative, more open-minded, more individuals that will put the rules. So, but we are working what we have today, because there's still an opportunity. We're still in a good space, and we're trying to work with what we have today. Is it great? Yes, it is good. Can it be better? It can be much better for others. But as us, as Zane Cash, I'm still backed by a bigger group, by Zane and so forth. If I was an entrepreneur coming by myself, then it would be impossible for me to come back to Iraq to actually start up a business.
Thank you. That's one of the best expositions I've heard, Yazin. Thank you very much. Jawad, any comments from your point of view? I think you made a very clear point.
Yeah, just to look at global and regional examples and learn from them. It's really when you've seen over 150 examples in countries on, you can know which results in optimal, which framework results in optimal results, and which frameworks don't work. And clearly, Iraq needs to adopt a lot of the best practices when it comes to mobile infrastructure and broadband infrastructure, for sure.
Thank you. Laura, back to you. You're muted.
Sorry. I don't mean to give another action item to the government, but I think that, I think when I think about the biggest impact that they could make is building on both the comments of Yazin and Jawad, and really examining old laws and new laws. We were speaking about an old law just before the call that they're just recently choosing to enforce, that really impacts small businesses and favors the ones that are more established and the bigger players. So examining your old and current laws. An example of a new law that was just released in 2019 is the Iraqi Shareholder Law. All Iraqi businesses have to have 51% local ownership, which is really prohibitive. When we think about businesses that want to acquire Iraqi startups and development of the private sector in the Iraqi tech ecosystem. And it even is, even just to register a foreign minority shareholder is something we're having huge difficulties with in our personal experience, registering institutional investors from the US and abroad. So those would be my biggest 2 recommendations to the Iraqi government, because as we've all talked about, there's tremendous opportunity. Our startups that we've invested in are reaching triple-digit growth month over month. There's excellent opportunity, but just those small regulatory issues could make a huge impact.
Thank you so much. Alexander, would you like to finalize at all? Lots to take away from our entrepreneurs here.
Indeed, that's a daunting task. Look, I would say, and I think Yazin put it well. The government should be focusing on broadening their taxpayer base, which means you need more formality, you need the ability of SME to grow, and you need to move from a model where you are basically taxing people with a rent sort of sinking mindset to moving to a mindset where you're going to tax the delta of growing the country forward. So taxing growth and success is what should be done. But right now, Iraq has always been just taxing a very small base of company and being on a rent sort of sinking mindset. And you know, this is it's quite difficult to create that shift or that transformation. But I agree with all of the panelists that it will not be sustainable, and we are seeing it as of 2020. Just look at the three documents I refer earlier. The government is in a trap. Therefore, that transformation is going to need to happen beyond digital. Digital is just one of the drivers for that growth, and then the government should be taxing that growth rather than taxing people even before they start to exist. Over.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists here very much for a fascinating conversation. Just also to say, we're going to move now rapidly on to Caroline Mcghar, who's going to talk to us about the online consumer behavior in Iraq. Everybody's welcome to stay. Alexandra, I think you may be leaving us, but I hope not. But I think Yazin, Laura, and Jawad will stay with us for this next session, which I'm afraid might be a bit shorter, Caroline. So thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. Thank you much, everybody. And Caroline, can I give you the floor or the video? Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone. I was listening in on the discussion just now, so fascinating. I'll be coming at this from a different angle from the consumer and hopefully focusing more on the opportunity rather than the adversity. I'll be showing my screen shortly. So first things first, thank you to Ashley, thanks to IBBC for hosting this and continuing to provide these opportunities for dialogue on subjects in business and Iraq. It really is massively valuable for us and does open a lot of conversations too, so thank you for the efforts that go into this. I know it doesn't run itself. Just to introduce myself briefly for the participants. My name is Caroline Mcghar. I'm the Managing Director of Think Bank in Iraq. We're a market research agency. We're registered in Iraq. We're based in Sulaymaniyah and Erbil in the Kurdistan region. That's primarily because my Iraqi business partner is from Sulaymaniyah, and I like to go for walks in the street every now and then, so I'm happy up here. I've been here since 2016. We founded the company in 2018, so I came out here with YouGov, which some of you may be familiar with as a global market research agency. But we set up Think Bank in 2018 just to give a bit more focus to consumer and B2B opportunities that we noticed were available in the country, and we've been going from there really. What I'm going to present today is really the view of the Iraqi consumer from a study we did earlier this year, just before lockdown. I'll introduce that shortly. And I think the way this ties into the tech aspect of this will be the content of it, but also what really drove us to found Think Bank, which is the opportunity that we saw in the Iraqi consumer, that they're a country of 40 million people, a young and growing population with needs, with their consuming, and an overlooked country as well. It's one of the biggest populations in the Middle East, and we noticed that internationally, my background is London primarily, that you can't really use countries like Jordan and Egypt as a proxy when you look at countries in the Middle East and looking at Iraq. So tried to bring a bit of light onto that. So I'll just share my screen. Just give me a moment as I bring this up. Is that working?
Yep.
Great, I'll make that full screen. Okay, so I'll just introduce the survey. So this is from our Iraq Consumer Survey 2020. Give you some background as to what we did and why and when, which is important to understand this. So We surveyed just under 2,000 Iraqi internet users. Important that we stress is the internet users, not the general population. I'll repeat that throughout the presentation. Covering a range of topics really back in March 2020. So this is pre-lockdown, it's the pre-lockdown, pre-COVID view of Iraq. So some things will be changing. We can speculate on that. We're also going to be repeating this as a COVID view. I've got some feedback from clients as to what we do know has changed, but we can talk about that as we go through it. But I think it gives a nice snapshot of that pre-pandemic Iraq and Iraqi behaviors, Iraqi consumer behaviors and attitudes, which we can then look at and review when we see the effects of the pandemic as well in our follow-up study, hopefully taking place in the next couple of months. So overall, the Iraq Consumer Survey covered a few different areas, so digital behaviors, financial inclusion, online shopping, travel, food service, and FMCG. Today, we'll just focus on the first three of those. I think it's the most relevant. There's a huge amount of data here, and I'll try to get through as much as possible that I think is engaging. Just some comments on who took part in the survey. So this took place online, but we did recruit from cities. So we targeted cities, partly for some of the reasons that have been outlined in the previous session. It's access to internet and some online survey and ease of recruitment there. So we looked at Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, Najaf, and Kurdish cities of Erbil and Sulaymaniyah. We spoke to 18 to 45-year-olds. That's also significant in considering what kind of responses we're getting, and that's weighted roughly how we'd expect that population to fall out nationally. Because it's 2,000 respondents, slightly more male than female respondents. When we do 1,000 online surveys, we can get this to 50% female. The 2,000 females are just harder to reach, so we have to allow that. We think there are more males online potentially as well, but a lot of females use male profiles, so that's something that we do deal with, but I won't go into that today. That's a different topic. So moving on to just the digital behaviors for online internet users in Iraq. So we asked them when they're using the internet, how long they're using the internet for. So more than 50% say they're spending more than 5 hours online a day. For those not familiar with Iraq digital behaviors, that really means certainly social media. For most people, that would mean Facebook, although we do know that that is changing for the younger age groups, much greater use of Instagram, of Snapchat, TikTok, and so on, as you've seen in other areas. But really, online is social media for Iraqis. And just to give you a bit more of a picture of, what does this look like? Let's put some flavor to this. So when an Iraqi is online, well, 59% just before they're going to bed. A good section first thing in the morning. If they're anything like me, that means looking at emails, but I suspect not. And who are they with when they're looking at on the internet? This is important if you think about messaging to consumers as well. So a third with their family, which is not unusual. People spend a lot of time with their families in Iraq, and also with friends, slightly higher for males than females there, and some differences in age groups. We also know that 20% of our respondents admitted to using the internet when they're in the bathroom. I don't put that on slides. Just 5% admitted to using the internet when they're driving. I suspect not all are being so honest there. Just to give a flavour of how the internet is playing a part in people's lives. How are they getting online? So the majority of these internet users are getting online with their smartphones. 80% are using smartphones to get online. Again, this is the internet users, it's not the general population of Iraq. And many of them are using smartphones. Smartphone penetration is lower for the general population, but for internet users, that's what we're thinking about for digital products and so on, digital services. This is how they're accessing this is the device they're using. We see on the right here that this consoles is one of the lowest here. I suspect if we open that out to maybe younger age groups, maybe below 18, that might go up a little bit. But gaming is something we want to get into a bit more, but not in this presentation. And I think the other aspect of how people are getting online that needs to be considered is how they're actually connecting. This was covered slightly in the previous session. When we ask people how they usually go online, these are the answers that they were giving us. So this is a multiple choice question. It's not their main way of getting online, it's how they usually get online. So they can answer multiple choice. That's where we have more than 50% some here. I think what's really interesting in this slide is actually when you break this down by the region. So if we look at the difference between the Kurdistan region and the southern and central areas of Iraq, so the federal Iraq Arab-speaking governorates, we see a really big difference here, and it's significant, and it just shows perhaps what you need to consider when you think about Iraqi consumers, think about how they're using digital services, the challenges they might face, and their behaviours in terms of ease of access and so on. I think what's interesting here is that use of landline at home in the Iraqi Kurdistan region, perhaps driven by infrastructure and so on, new builds and so on. And also that difference between 3G and Wi-Fi usage as well, perhaps one cannibalizing the other. So maybe that's to do with the provision of different providers. I use Wi-Fi when I'm out in the Kurdistan region rather than 3G usually. Also that prevalence for public usage in south and central parts of Iraq, but not so much a typical usage among the Kurdistan population. So it's an interesting thing to consider there in terms of how people are connected to the internet, what they're doing when they're looking at your products. If you think about people not completing transactions and so on, as was discussed in the previous session, this can account for some of that quality of service you're getting and how you're typically connecting when you are connecting. So being out and about gets affected by these types of connection considerations. And I think it's also been outlined in the previous session, the internet is not seen as a way to save money by most. This is partly due to the high cost of internet. That's the operators having to pass on that high cost for the operators themselves, having to pass that on to the end user. Partly it's ease of access, so that convenience aspect comes into it. If you think of how we might see the internet saving money in say, Gulf states, in Europe and the US, it is, we save money because of our online purchases, our online services, it makes life easier. There are other constraints to consider there as well. So, 38% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing that they're able to save money by using the internet for certain tasks, I think is an important point to note there. So now we can look at what are those constraints, and we'll look at sort of the financial inclusion, financial attitudes to financial services and trust in financial services. And then we'll go on to online shopping and some behaviors that we've noticed there despite some of these challenges. So in the first instance, Iraq is a cash economy. For our survey, just 17% of internet users say they have a bank account. I know the figures can look a bit higher when we look at other stats on this, but just bear in mind we're talking to 18 to 45-year-olds within Iraq, and that might affect the figures here. I think it's probably gone a bit more this year, and there's efforts to get people banking, but I think within a few percentage points, it's largely a cash economy. And here on the right, you can see the Larry Khan in a bill, so a lot of cash on the streets. And what does that lead us to ask? So we asked about, well, why is that? What is the issue? And we asked about, as market researchers, what is the trust? Is there trust in financial institutions in Iraq? And it's low. The most trusted financial institution in Iraq is the Hawala system, which is the long-standing traditional system of moving cash within Iraq, outside of Iraq, across the Middle East, across many countries in the world, unregulated, not particularly loved by governments for that reason, but it is the most trusted system. Above both local banks, that's banks from Iraq or from Kurdistan, from banks outside Iraq, foreign banks that operate in Iraq, is more trusted. And we see that as well, it works. It's what people are used to, it's what people understand in their day-to-day life already. So when we try to introduce new services, new products in finance to Iraqi consumers, you have to bear in mind that they're thinking about things in terms of cash and moving cash. And so maybe the advantages of financial products and financial services that are put towards them are harder to understand, are more alien in some cases. And we also added to this some of the failings in banking over the last couple of decades as well in Iraq, some of those issues that really put people off keeping money in their bank accounts. And we know even from efforts to encourage banking over the last couple of years that people do just cash out at the end of the month when they get their salaries in. So some mistrust in banks there, but ultimately that continuing trust in in an older but more familiar system based on trust and knowing who the money is going to, knowing who's going to send the money. If you use Hawala, you probably go to someone you know and you trust it because you know he has to trust the person who received it at the other end. It's a very personal type of service, if you can think of it that way, which perhaps isn't the case in some other banking and financial services. So what about financial service usage? So in the survey, we asked respondents which of the services listed here they'd used in the previous month. The most significant finding, I think, is that 63% of our respondents had used none of those services. So from credit cards down to everyday banking, digital money, such as Zane, Cashless, Hawala, and money transfer services. Most people aren't using any of them in the previous month. This may have changed with COVID. That's something we want to explore further. And the other interesting takeout from this is the difference between genders. So 73% of females hadn't used any financial services in the previous month versus 57% of men. Perhaps we wouldn't be surprised by that difference in the usage there, but consider female consumers are important consumers. You know, they do purchase lots of products. They're responsible for decisions on purchasing lots of products. So the fact they're outside of these financial services and not using them as much can have an impact on how we look at products they can sell. And it's a bit of a missed opportunity. And I think, you know, this will be shown further in when we look at the online opportunity in the next section. But just before we come to that, when we think about this low usage of financial services, this low trust, how do we overcome that? So how do we encourage Iraqi consumers to use financial services? There is obviously a benefit for doing that in terms of building credit ratings, in terms of ease of access to goods and making purchases, and not having to rely on some of the failings of cash, such as the high cost of transfer, high cost of purchasing goods from a distance. And I think we asked a couple of questions in the survey, getting into the area of behavioural economics really. We asked about discounting the future, but also some basic questions about how they assess product offers. So I'm just going to go into one of them here. And this is a very basic sort of question about a price calculation offer. So we put to the respondents, you know, there are two TVs, same TV in two different shops, two different stores, worth 100,000 IQD. That's the original price. In one store, there is a 15,000 IQD discount, it's a cash discount, 15,000 Iraqi dinar. And in the other store, there's a 10% discount. Which is the better bargain? I'll give you a second to work it out for yourselves, but this is a fairly straightforward calculation. And these are the results that we got. 61% actually said that 15,000 Iraqi dinar discount was the better bargain. So, you know, that's not as high as we'd like to see. Slightly higher among men, lower among females, slightly lower among younger people. How we interpret this is we have to be careful how we interpret this sort of finding. This doesn't mean that Iraqi consumers can't do maths. Iraqi consumers are sophisticated. This is more about how you communicate finance and financial offers and how people make quick decisions when they're thinking about finance. It's not maths. When you think about money, you think about a lot of things, what you're spending on, what are your concerns, what are the pressures on you. So you make quick decisions and you make sort of use heuristics to kind of make decisions with financial offers as well. What we suspect is happening here is that the percentage discount is encouraging people to choose that as the better offer. Yeah, that means it's a better offer. That means it's at 10%. That's a significant amount of a sum, right? This could be pushing people towards selecting that. Those saying it's the same, maybe just don't want to engage in making that financial decision. You know, we're also doing this artificially inside a survey, and we've followed up with some qualitative work as well. But I think it's about being careful about how we do communicate finance to Iraqi consumers. There's this great opportunity, which we'll go into shortly, in terms of increasing financial inclusion. It's about understanding how Iraqis do already interact with financial products and financial services, just Hawala and so on, what they're comfortable with and how they communicate with it. I'll talk about financial services every day of my life with my husband. That's part of day-to-day conversation where I'm from. Perhaps isn't in Iraq, when there isn't that critical mass of financial services and financial products available and being used by a significant part of the population. Just a quick sort of anecdote on this. In the previous life, when I worked here in Iraq, I had a financial officer report to me for the company. He taught banking twice a week in one of the local universities. So he knew what he was doing. He's a sophisticated accountant. I once handed him the company credit card to make a purchase. He'd never used a credit card in his life. So I think that's just a bit of background. Look, we're not talking about people who are not sophisticated, but it's more their experience in discussing financial products and making those decisions in day-to-day life. And then just finally to come on to the opportunity of online, and we talked about digital and digital service and digital product services in Iraq. From our survey, we found that 57% of our respondents had shopped at least once online in the previous 3 months to doing the survey. Now, what does that mean? We didn't simply ask them, have you shopped online in the last 3 months? We asked them about several different types of behaviours and activities. Because shopping online in Iraq obviously means something different to shopping online in, say, London or New York or in Dubai. We don't have that. We have that cash economy. We don't have these bank accounts being used by the majority of the population. And we also don't have address systems that necessarily work so well. And there's a lot of cash on delivery. And so that kind of click and collect, that kind of click and deliver, click and it'll show up in a few days, doesn't really happen in the same way in Iraq. So we asked about different activities. So this includes ordering a product online using online messaging. So this really means going to most likely a social media page, a Facebook page, or a retailer, a seller, seeing a product you like and messaging them about it, saying, I want to buy this product. And you'll agree how you go for the transaction that way. Ordering a product via an app and paying with cash on delivery. Cash on delivery is still king in Iraq. We also asked about finding a product online and ordering that product via telephone. We don't include that in the figure for online purchase in the previous 3 months, but we do ask about it because some Iraqis will describe that as buying online. So just to understand, there's a lot of activity going on here, a lot of different types of purchase, but I think when we're thinking about purchasing online, I want to mention that actually an activity that's majority happened online. It's not a telephone call that's happened later. Telephone calls may well be part of the other purchase as well, even for ordering online via an app. I still get regular phone calls when I do that for delivery, for food delivery or shopping delivery here. That in-app purchase is less common there on the right-hand side. So that's an idea of how people are shopping online. They're finding workarounds to compete with to deal with that cash economy and the lack of addresses, but they are interested in buying online. This is the opportunity here. 57% of these internet users have made an online purchase in the previous 3 months pre-COVID. We expect this to have gone up by now. So what are they buying? What are they interested in? What is taking Iraqis online? So here we have different products groups that we asked about. So leading 3 is really clothing and footwear, food delivery, and health and beauty. I think that didn't surprise me as someone who's lived here for a while. At the other end of that, we have the groceries down here on 4% in the bottom right corner. We know from some clients we work with who do work in online delivery services that has grown significantly in certain parts of Iraq while we've had the COVID pandemic to deal with. So in some areas to 4 times greater than this figure, although if they accept the figure was probably reasonable pre-pandemic. So we are here, and we will be following up this question in our COVID consumer survey. But I think here we see the opportunities. So, clothing, footwear, food delivery, health and beauty, and then some consumer electronics, household appliances. On the consumer electronics, interesting aspect of this that I'm not showing here in the slide is that actually men were more likely to buy consumer electronics than women. Men are also more likely to make that phone call after finding the product online rather than making a purchase via messaging. That may be to do with the product and how it's sold, but it also may be to do with how men want to buy products as well. So maybe a bit more work on trying to get men into their consumer electronics online. And I think I mentioned earlier about that this phenomenon of female respondents not using financial services and financial products as much as men. When we look at these top 3 products bought online by online shoppers, we found something really interesting. And that's that women, and particularly young women, are driving demand for online products. Perhaps not surprising that women are a bit more likely to shop online than men, but it's really women who are driving these online purchases. So in the chart here, it's a little bit complicated, but we've split this so men and women, blue and pink, because we're imaginative, and just split by age group as well, so the 18 to 24-year-olds for each group. So for clothing and footwear, 54% of young women, so 18 to 24-year-old women, had bought clothing or footwear online in the previous 3 months to the survey. So that's really leading on that. For food delivery, again, it was interesting to see younger women leading on food delivery, fairly consistent percentage of across male age groups purchasing food delivery online, but increase among younger women. A few things might lie behind that. It's not as common for young women to go out to eat, so more likely to order in. Also, maybe with younger families or part of a family, there may be the person within their family who makes that online order. So perhaps ordering for a wider family group as well. So that's some interesting aspects there, but these are the people who are making the purchase. This is the consumer group making the purchase, possibly making the decision as well. And health and beauty, again, I mean, I think we're not surprised that's led by women, although some significant male purchases there too. And the final slide just to share on this is really the reasons for shopping online and what's driving people to shop online as well. So we see the opportunity, but what's driving the opportunity. And here I've just split this out by region again, because we saw an interesting difference here. So overall, finding new products is the main driver for shopping online. It's a bigger choice. That's what gets people online and what they're going to find in those bricks and mortar shops in Iraq. But when we look at the difference between the Kurdistan region and the other areas of Iraq, it's that convenience is really different. And that's significant. I think that possibly reflects some of those advances already made in how online is working in the Kurdistan region. Some of those services already available. I find it very easy. I've been here for 4 years. My life has changed as the opportunity to just purchase via an app has increased, for grocery, for online delivery, for, it's just so much more convenient. If it happens, it works. So there might be an aspect of that working here, but also that also aspect of the ease of internet connection and so on, access to devices, a slightly more comfortable way of living as well, I suppose, in some ways. So that's a very quick overview and very top level actually of the data we had. Sorry actually if I've gone on a bit longer than expected, but hopefully that's sort of given food for thought, maybe raise more questions than it answers. But that's really what we're here to do, and just kind of show there's an opportunity there, and just show that there's data also on this, and we're going to be updating that in the next couple of months as well to give a COVID view of that. So thank you for that. If you want to see a more in-depth view and a full report, if you go to our website, thinkbankiraq.com, the white paper's on there as well.
Caroline, thank you very much indeed. That's very fascinating to shed a real light on this whole consumer insight, and it rather underlines that message we've been having all along, which is there's a big opportunity here for penetration of internet, for penetration of financial services, for people to shop and do things online. And I suspect you're right, the COVID will have actually accelerated this quite significantly. So fascinated to see what you're going to come up with later in the year. Thank you very much. I might just ask one of the two panelists if they'd like to comment or add their particular perspectives. Is Yazen, are you there? He may have gone, I don't know. Okay, Laura, I can see you there. Is there something you'd like to say from your perspective? Because I know you've got some online delivery companies and
Yes, I think the data agrees with what our entrepreneurs have also shared with us. So it's really interesting to see that upwards of 95% of their clients are using cash for all of their transactions. So I think that's the majority of payments. But it was exciting to talk to MasterCard and some of these other organizations that are trying their best to work with governments, local banks on creating more digital payment offerings. But it's just not there yet.
Thank you. And I know that Jawad has had to leave, but he did have a question to talk about. He says here, would you be doing a face-to-face random survey of Iraqis with one question: do you use the internet? And that would give a profile of the makeup of internet users by gender, age, education, and town. Any thoughts on just asking the simple question: do you use the internet, and get an Iraqi view of things?
I would be very happy to do a face-to-face interview asking a representative sample even of Iraqis, but it would come with a price tag. And we're absolutely able to do it. And if Jawad wants to maybe help support something like that, we can look at this sort of information, and we have to pull information from elsewhere, but we do regularly run representative surveys face-to-face. We can add these questions into it. We have some understanding in-house already.
Okay, thank you. I apologize that MasterCard on this today. They were going to, but they're on a plane flight. But I know that they're very keen on the concept of financial inclusion and the cashless economy. And these are two key issues that affect both of these things, that people can use and trust banks online, and that people can use cash or not use cash, in fact, and particularly obvious in Iraq's point of view, where 95% of people are still using cash. Because they trust it more. So we have to begin to establish how we can get people to become more financially trusting of the institutions. And I'm sure that Yazin and Zane Cash will be a very good example of where you can trust it. But again, he underlined the fact that the internet can be very variable, so that you often get a flashback from consumers believing it's the telcos that are doing it, but it's actually internet systems. So there's a holistic issue here, but there's a particular one to encourage people to be a bit bolder and braver to use it. Is there any thoughts, Caroline, you've got about what would encourage people to use online banking or financial services a bit more?
Well, I think if we just look at the example of what is trusted, and that's the Hawala system, and as I say, I think that the biggest thing there is it works, and it's seen to work, and people are familiar with it. I think an interesting aspect of what Zane Cash has been doing, and I know our figures say 6% using these digital financial digital money products back in March. That compares fairly favorably with those who've used any banking services. But I know what Zane Cash has been doing has been at the B2B level, and we run a lot of B2B research as well. And for example, we interview 1,000 cement retailers every month across Iraq, face to face. Actually, we can ask them if they use the internet. Wow. but
Dusty.
We know from our clients there that they have worked with Zane Cash and introduced Zane Cash for their merchants, and it's really improved that experience, and it's showing that where it can work with businesses, that is potentially one way to encourage trust. I'd love to explore that further, something we've looked at particularly. But you think about cement retailers. I don't know if you're very familiar with them in Iraq, but we have more problems with them than when we ask about security questions. So quite a rough bunch, and if they can use Zane Cash, then it's definitely a usable product. And it's about building that trust and showing it works, showing it's effective, giving some examples of how it works. I think there's that sort of a bit of a gap in understanding and usage, and until we get to that critical mass, you won't have that buy-in. It'll be really fascinating to see how COVID has really pushed people towards this. I know it has pushed people towards digital products. One thing I would say is that we found that most people who were using digital money were already banking. So much greater uses of other financial services among those who are banked. So I think that's possibly the little fulcrum we need to kind of tip a bit further into expanding that financial inclusion. I
would have liked a bank on board, but they're actually in the real conference going on in Dubai at the moment. We have a lot of our banks there, but it's a big topic in itself as to why and what they're doing. I don't know if Alexandra is still at all on the system. Alexandra, are you there? He may just be listening. No, I think he might be doing something else. Anyway, so the point is that the World Bank are putting this big project in place very soon to help.
Yes, Ashley, I'm here.
Alexandra, I just thought this was a great time for you to just to come in and comment on the project you're about to run to educate Iraqi SMEs, basically around use of digital banking, use of the internet, etc. To the point about finance that Caroline was making there. That there's not a lot of trust, but they need understanding and they need usage.
Yes, I mean one thing I can comment from our experience is that it's sort of a very delicate balance that you need to strike when trying to promote the cashless economy. I think that the issue of trust is quite important, and this is prevalent in Iraq. But one thing that a product and service provider needs to first and foremost focus on is the user experience. This is the most important, because the product that has found its product market fit and that is getting traction is first and foremost because the product is sort of easy to use. I know that the user or consumer experience in Iraq is constrained by those many regulatory barrier whereby you have sort of not a smooth user experience along the value chain of cashless payments. So in addition of trust, you have that user's experience, and then striking that balance between protecting the consumer and being able, how to say that, to create opportunity for businesses to make data out of to make money from the data out of this consumer. And I think Iraq needs to find its own model, because there is no one size fits all model when it comes to consumer protection. As you know, in Europe, we are very much citizen centric, protecting the data and the experience of the users. Like if you're in Europe, every time you go on a website, you have to click 3-4 times that you agree on the cookies, on this and this and that. Well, it's not the case in the US or in Africa or in the Middle East. When you are in the US, they see the user as just sort of a customer or client. And there is a model that is emerging, I think, in Africa, in the Middle East, where it's sort of in between the American and the sort of South Asia Pacific model, where in South Asia Pacific, they do not protect but control that data. And I think Iraq has to come up with its own model, and it's quite challenging, but the work that is being done by Caroline is exactly what we need, because to take an informed decision, you need data, you need insight, you need statistic, and this should come as further as a body of knowledge to be able to then convince the authority to come up with their own model that makes sense for Iraqi consumer. Over.
Thank you very much indeed. Laura, did you want to complete with anything or finish off before we possibly bring an end to this luscious session?
Yeah, I really identified with what Caroline mentioned about how trust is a huge issue, but perhaps the starting point is B2B, or within businesses, business leaders starting to implement technology, which we've already seen in our own the startups that we've invested in and in the market. For example, we met with one of our entrepreneurs, the founder of Al Sari, and his business is nearly cashless entirely within, internally. So his operations are, purely technology driven, and that's really, or almost completely technology driven, which is very exciting. And so I think that perhaps those employees that are getting exposed to the technology and seeing cashless movements with their salaries and things like that will maybe be the impetus of some people developing more trust in the cashless transaction.
Thank you very much. I think Yazin may not be with us, but Caroline, anything you'd finally like to say?
Yeah, I think just the final point is really just to underline that this opportunity, what the consumers are trying to do. So they are trying to shop online. They're finding workarounds despite these constraints that have been identified in the chain from digital access, quality of internet, regulatory issues around payments and so on. But consumers find a way. Demand is there, and you know, that top driver across Iraq is just a wider range of products to buy. You know, people want access, and if we can work on the regulatory side of it, you know, the demand is there. It sounds somewhat, you know, what Laura said, and my experience of working with various businesses here, that businesses want to meet that demand as well. So we have all the ingredients, and it's just about making that process smoother wherever we can. There's no doubt that the Iraqis want to live a more enjoyable life. That I don't think you need a market research company to tell you that. But they're also making efforts to do it, and they're finding workarounds. And you know, if you think about it from a government point of view, if you're making purchases via Facebook, via messaging, you have no view of that. So how can you tax it? How can you benefit from that as a state? Maybe that's the angle to get government involved. But I think that could be it.
That's the next one. Can I thank you very much indeed? I like the fact that the ingredients are all there. I think we're all unified in believing that the opportunity is there. We just need to get a few obstructions out of the way to get on with it, as in normally. I'd like to really thank everybody. Caroline Mcghar from Think Tank, thank you so much. Laura Qadari from Iraq Tech Ventures, thank you very much. Yazin Al-Tamimi from Zane Cash, Jawad Abbasad from the GSMA. I'd like to thank you all very much for contributing this. There will be a video of this put online, most likely on our website, so you can see this and watch it again many times and share it with your friends if you'd like to. It's been a marathon session. We have quite a few people still with us. I know that some of our members have been on Sadar Group, thank you, Qadari Group, Iraq Business News, the Uruk Group, the Capital Bank, EY, Al Jamiri, quite a few. And the exciting thing about IBBC at this time is that rather than you'd think, well, things have got rather difficult, we've actually got new members in the last few months. So we have a number of new members. Any of those listening in, very happy to have you on board. And I hope the rest of the conference in Dubai is going well. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us. Share the video, read it, see it, love it. And I'm sure there's plenty more that we can do, and I'll do another session before too long. So goodbye, and thank you very much. Bye.